I mean 1,000 soldiers. Not the police, not a small patrol unit, 1,000 military soldiers that was armed and ordered, surrounding one man's house. They didn't come to arrest him, they came to destroy him. These soldiers beat his fans, they beat his musicians, they burned his recording studio to the ground, they destroyed everything that he has spent years building. And then they found his mother, a 78 years old woman, and guess what? They threw her out of the window and she died from the injuries a month later. Do you know what that man did? He kept singing. He made an album about what the government did to him and he marched a coffin 20 kilometers through the streets of Lagos straight to the military headquarters. He ran for president twice and he never not once backed down. His name was Fela Kuti and this is the story the world has never fully told. To understand Fela, you must first understand where he came from because nothing about his beginning predicted who he would eventually become. He was born on October 15th, 1938 in Abeokuta, a city in the southwestern Nigeria. His full name was Olufela Olusegun Oloduton Ransom Kuti. But let's forget about the name for a second. Let's talk about his family. His father was an Anglican reverend and a school principal who was respected, disciplined, and structured. His mother, however, Fumilayo Ransom Kuti, was something else entirely. She was one of the most respected women in Nigerian history, an anti-colonial activist who organized market women to fight the British rule. She traveled internationally to speak about Africans' rights, and she stood in front of the colonial governors and she did not blink. But tragedy hit early. In 1955, at just 17 years old, Fela's father died. He lost the man who had first put him in front of a piano. And it was just 3 years later after the demise of his father that he left for London, carrying grief, ambition, and a mother's iron will in his blood. Fela was born into a family that already knew how to fight power. But as a young man, he was quiet, he was studious, he played piano in church, and his parents wanted him to become a doctor. Very, very typical of Nigerian parents. They would either want you to become a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer. So in 1958, at 20 years old, they sent him to London to study medicine, which lasted for about 5 minutes. Very typical of Fela, if you ask me. Fela switched to music at Trinity College of Music, and in London, he was surrounded by jazz, by Miles Davis, by John Coltrane and Charlie Parker. Something in Fela woke up. He discovered what his hands were made for. Music. And guess what? He formed a jazz brand, played clubs and soaked everything up. But something else was happening to him too. He started noticing how Europeans saw Africans. Yes, he saw the signs reading no blacks. He saw the way people looked at him like he was less than them, like Africa was something that was meant to be dismissed. And this bothered him deeply because he didn't know what to do with that feeling. He returned to Nigeria in 1963 and formed a band called it Kola Lobitos. He was mixing jazz with high life. He was talented, he was respected, but something in his heart was still searching. You know, when a man's heart is still yearning and yearning for something. And I wanted to mention this. Do you know that Fela's mother, Fumilayo Ransom Kuti, was so politically powerful that the British colonial government placed her on a security watch list? This same woman that they would later throw out from a window. Anyways, the real transformation came and it would arrive from the most unexpected place. It was not Nigeria, it wasn't London, but Los Angeles, California, United States of America. Ask me how. In 1969, Fela traveled to the United States of America on tour with Kola Lobitos. He ended up stranded, broke and barely surviving in Los Angeles. And this is what makes this whole story very, very human because Fela, we all know, the man that would go on to defy the entire Nigerian military, who would build his own independent republic inside Lagos, was walking around Los Angeles with newspapers stuffed in his shoes because he could not bear to replace them. Then, at the NAACP event at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, he met a woman called Sandra Izsadore. Sandra was a Black American singer, an activist, passionate, deeply political, and extremely well read. She saw something in Fela immediately that nobody had ever seen. And then she invited her to his home. And then she started educating. She gave him books on Malcolm X, Hugh Newton, named them. And then she talked to him about Black nationalism, Pan-Africanism, and the history of colonialism, the deliberate theft of American identity, dignity of Black people everywhere. I want you all to think about this for a second. Fela, a man that was Nigerian, born, bred, and raised there, had to travel out of the African continent to California, United States of America, to meet a Black American woman who handed him books about his own continent, something he had never ever been taught, or something that he had never ever known about. This is how colonialism reaches, how deep colonialism reaches. It doesn't just steal your land, it steals how you see yourself, the way and manner you see yourself. Fela later said in his own words, Sandra gave me the education I wanted to know. She was the one that spoke to me about Africa differently. So eventually he returned to Nigeria a completely different man, and he changed his band name from Kola Lobitos to African 17. And then he invented something entirely new, something that we all know today and we are all proud. When they talk about Nigeria, they talk about Africa, they talk about Afrobeat. In 1975, Fela invented Afrobeat. And then he dropped his own last name, something that he did that was very, very wow. Everybody was like, wow. He dropped his last name, Ransom Kuti, to Anikolapo Kuti. And in Yoruba, Anikolapo means someone that carries death in his pouch. It was a way to tell the government that even though you would want to fight me, even though you would want to beat me, even though you would want to arrest me, even though you would want to kill me, I am not afraid of death, and I'm going to face it man to man, head on to head on. In 1970s, Fela did something nobody had ever done before. He took a compound in his Lagos home, a recording studio, a clinic, and a nightclub, and declared it an independent republic. He named it the Kalakuta Republic, and he put up a sign and told the Nigerian government that their laws did not apply inside those walls. One man, just one hefty man, looked at the Nigerian government and told them directly in the eye that this land is mine. You have no power over here. He opened a nightclub and named it the African Shrine. So every night, sometimes it would run till like 5 or 6 a.m. in the morning. Fela and his band performed. The crowd was electric, and between songs, Fela would speak, lecturing, preaching, calling out the corrupt government officials by their name one by one. And he did that on stage in front of the microphone and in front of hundreds and even not maybe thousands of people. The government hated him, but the people loved him. It is worthy to note that Fela had been arrested 200 times by the Nigerian military government. Amnesty International repeatedly declared him a prisoner of conscience, meaning that his arrests were purely political and not criminal. In 1974, the police tried to plant marijuana on him during a raid, and Fela, even without hesitating, he just swallowed the whole thing, and actually, they detained him, hoping that he would produce the marijuana, but he didn't. And then he went home and made a music about it and called it expensive shit. Then in 1977, Fela released a song called The Zombie. The Zombie we all know, right? A song that compared Nigerian soldiers to mindless zombies, following others without even thinking. It sold out across all the country. Like everybody was singing it. Wherever you go, to the hospital, to the clinic, even down to the churches, people were singing it. And this irritated the Nigerian government. They were very, very furious. So on February 18th, 1977, they responded. 1,000 soldiers surrounded the Kalakuta Republic. They beat up everybody inside there, musicians, dancers, workers, visitors. They destroyed every instrument. They smashed the recording studios to pieces. They burned the entire compound to the ground. And Fela himself was beaten so bad that he suffered a fractured skull and broken bones. And then guess what? They later found his mother. Fumilayo Ransom Kuti, a 78 years old woman, a woman who had spent her entire life fighting for Nigeria's freedom against the British Empire. Nigeria's soldiers took her and threw her out of the window. And she died from the injuries she sustained from that raid exactly a month later. And guess what? The Nigerian government's response was the destruction was caused by an unknown, and I'm not making this up, an unknown soldier. Like nobody was named, nobody was punished, nobody was charged, nothing, absolutely nothing. Fela took his mother's coffin and loaded it in a truck, like the very, very dramatic event that happened. He led the procession throughout the streets of Lagos, 20 kilometers on foot, all the way to the Supreme Military Headquarters. And he left the coffin at their door, like, yes, here is it, the woman you guys killed. It's her dead body. I mean, that was what he said, like figuratively. And then he went home and he started writing music. What a bold and unrelentless human being Fela was. I need you to pause here and think about this like very, very differently. The government just killed your mother, burned down everything that you have like invested your whole life for. Beat your friends, your workers, your family, every lawyer, every journalist, every international body said that there is nothing you can do, that they are too powerful. So what do you do in this case? Do you leave? Do you go quiet? Do you protect yourself? I want you to take a second and really think about that, because what Fela did next is either the bravest thing you would ever hear or the most stubborn. But for me, I think it's the both. He was very brave and he was very stubborn. So guess what? In Fela's case, he didn't leave. He quietly rebuilt the shrine. He went back on stage and got louder. The government realized that they could not silence this man, or that he's actually very, very stubborn. I have to be straight with you here because this is where Fela's story gets a little bit complicated. Fela wasn't just a simple hero, he was also brilliant, fearless, and a very deeply flawed human being. In 1978, while in exile in Ghana, still grieving the loss of his mother, Fela made international headlines for a very different reason. He married 27 women simultaneously in a single traditional Yoruba ceremony, all of them dancers and singers from his band. Fela called it a political statement, a rejection of the Western monogamy imposed on Africa through colonialism. Some people accepted that, while many others did not. Some of these women later described life in the compound as isolating and controlling. He eventually divorced these women in 1986, and it is worthy to note that he held views about women in public life that directly contradicted everything his own mother stood for. Fumilayo, who was one of the most greatest feminists in Nigerian history, and his son, Fela, was sometimes having very contradictory views. People had argued about this for decades. There is no clean answer that exists, but this is what I believe. And you can disagree with me in the comment section. Great men are sometimes not simple men. The same person can challenge corrupt power with one hand and replicate it with the other. So, yes, Fela's music was revolutionary, but some of his personal lives were not. And both of these things can coexist at the same time. The fella was being beaten by the soldiers in Lagos while he was thrown into prison on fabricated charges, while the government was trying to do everything in their power to erase his power. The rest of the world was quietly and systematically studying his music. People like Paul McCartney, Brian Eno, Ginger Baker, they flew to Lagos specifically to be near him. They said he was one of the most important musicians alive. James Brown even called him a brother, and Stevie Wonder cited him as an influence. And the moment Fela died in 1997, guess what? Suddenly everyone, including the Western community, started citing his music. Beyonce sampled him, Jay-Z referenced him, and a Broadway musical about his life ran for over a year and won multiple Tony Awards. The world ignored him while he was fighting, but celebrated him once he was gone. This is the story of too many African artists, too many African thinkers, even the ones that we do not know about, dismissed while alive, however, studied and celebrated once they were gone and they could no longer speak for themselves. Fela knew this was coming, he said it himself, and he kept going anyways. In 1979, Fela founded his own political party and called it the MOP, the Movement of the People. He ran for president of Nigeria twice and was disqualified twice. In 1984, the military government, courtesy of General Muhammad Buhari, arrested him on the charges of currency smuggling, widely believed to have been manufactured by him, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, on the other hand, Amnesty International declared him a prisoner of conscience again. International pressures eventually mounted, and in 1986, after 20 months, he was released. He walked out of prison and went straight back to his shrine. But the years of beatings and imprisonment and the loss has taken a very huge toll on Fela's body, and he could not undo it. On August of 2nd, 1997, Fela Anikulapo Kuti died in Lagos. He was only 58 years old and the cause was heart failure due to the repercussions and complications from HIV/AIDS. His brother, Dr. Biko Ransom Kuti, announced the cause publicly. At a time when AIDS carried a very, very huge and enormous stigma in Nigeria, he said Fela would have wanted the whole world to know the truth. Over 1 million people attended his funeral. 1 million people in the streets of Lagos for a man the government spent 30 years trying to erase. You can imagine. Today, Fela is not just a Nigerian legend, he's a global icon. Many people like Beyonce, Paul McCartney, Jay-Z, Brian Eno, Erykah Badu, all has cited that they got direct influence from Fela. The Broadway musical also won multiple Tony Awards and ran it over a year on the course of Fela's music. His sons, Fela Kuti and Made Kuti, carry Afrobeat forward up until today. The African Shrine is still running, surprisingly. It still stands in Lagos, and every October, Lagos hosts Celebration, a week-long festival that draws thousands of people across the world just to celebrate Fela. In 1989, he shared a stage in New York with James Brown, two giants of black music, side by side. Two men who had used music as a weapon against injustice. The crowd must have felt like the whole world was on fire. I mean, I wish I was there, you know. After his death, the Grammy Awards gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award. All the posthumous recognition that said, "We see you now, even if the world was late." His daughter Yeni Kuti, who grew up in the Kalakuta Republic, who watched soldiers burn down the republic, has eventually rebuilt it. That same compound is now a museum, the Kalakuta Museum, a place people traveled just to see, like from the whole world, people traveled just to see the Kalakuta Republic. A scholarship in his name was also established at the Trinity Laban, the very school music in London that Fela attended while he was a young man. And if you still need proof that Fela's reach was global, Chris Martin of Coldplay co-curated one of his album sets. Idris Elba co-curated another. Two of the biggest names in the global entertainment choosing to put their names side by side on the legacy of Fela. Because Fela Kuti does not just belong to one genre. He does not just belong to one era. He belonged to a multitude of them. He belonged to a multitude of people who had been told to keep quiet and they refused. Do you also know that Fela released over 50 studio albums in his lifetime? This is more than most artists release in twice their time. While being arrested, while being imprisoned, and while being banned, he did all these things. So, what do we take from Fela's story? He was arrested over 200 times, his home was burned, his mother was killed, he was beaten, he was imprisoned again and again and again, and he was even exiled. But every single time he came back louder and stronger. Not because he was unafraid, but because he decided that some truths matter more than safety. Some fights, you don't get to walk away from just some fights because the odds are always impossible. I would like to state that Fela wasn't perfect. In fact, he never claimed to be. However, he was fully, completely, and unapologetically in himself. In a country that spent 3 decades trying to silence this man, he stood tenfold stronger than them. He called himself the Black President. However, there was no election, no palace, no title, just a man, a saxophone, and the truth. If this story moved you, please share this video right now. Tell me what you think about it in the comment section down below. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and share. My name is Chioma, and I'll see you next time. Bye.